Welcome to Reality Theory episode 5, our first episode of 2023. And I'm recording this on Martin Luther King Day. His birthday was yesterday, and it's a very special episode of Reality Theory in which we will go into the assassination of Martin Luther King and the alleged role of Jesse Jackson. And we'll be covering a lot of a book by the main man, the big homie, William Peppers. He wrote an amazing book called a few really good books, but the best book I would say is his most recent book, The Plot to Kill King. So let's get it started without a further of a beat. Boom. Judas and the Black Messiah Part 2, Jesse Jackson and Martin Luther King. Right to the left, we see Judas. Judas is the figure in the Bible who betrays Jesus to the Romans and eventually gets Jesus crucified. So in this case, we have Judas being Jesse Jackson and Martin Luther King being Jesus or the Black Messiah. Now, I'm basing this off a 2021 movie by the same name, Judas and the Black Messiah, about William O'Neill, who was an FBI informant, and Fred Hampton, who was a Black Panther leader in Chicago, who was assassinated by the FBI and the Chicago police with the help of William O'Neill, who not only drugged Fred Hampton, and he actually gave the FBI a floor plan of where Fred Hampton was living so they could assassinate him. So it's very clear right now. I'll read it out. In 1982, the city of Chicago, Cook County, and the federal government agreed to a settlement in which each would pay $606,333, equivalent to $1.73 million per payee in 2021, to a group of 9 plaintiffs, including the mothers of Hampton and Clark. The 1.85 million settlement, equivalent to 5.19 million in 2021, was believed to be the largest ever in a civil rights case. G. Flint Taylor, one of the attorneys representing the plaintiff, said the settlement is an admission of the conspiracy that existed between the FBI and Hanrahan's men to murder Fred Hampton. So here we have an example of a very popular Black leader who the government did not like, who was killed by the FBI and the government because of their kind of fear of a Black Messiah, fear of a Black leader who could not only unite Black people, but also unite people of other colors. Fred Hampton had something called the Rainbow Coalition, where he worked with working class white people, Latinos, all together against the kind of American government oppression, against the Vietnam War, towards more of socialism. So Fred Hampton and Martin Luther King were actually very similar. In a lot of ways. Both of them were very opposed to the Vietnam War. Both of them were for workers' rights. Fred Hampton would call himself a socialist. Martin Luther King was maligned as being a communist. So again, like I said, a lot of this video will be based on the book by Dr. William F. Pepper called The Plot to Kill King, The Truth Behind the Assassination of Martin Luther King. Now, Dr. William Pepper was the lawyer for a man by the name of Lloyd Jowers, or against the man Lloyd Jowers, and he was actually a lawyer for the King family in a civil case in Memphis in 1999, in which the jury ruled that there was a conspiracy to kill Martin Luther King that involved the U.S. government, the CIA, and several other agencies, and people like the Dixie Mafia, the traditional Italian Mafia. So after the trial happened, these are some of the reactions from some people who are very close to Martin Luther King, including his wife Coretta, his good friend Ralph Abernathy, and a juror in the Lloyd Jowers trial. So Coretta Scott King says there is abundant evidence of a major high-level conspiracy. The mafia, local, state, and federal government agencies were deeply involved in the assassination of my husband, and Mr. Ray was set up to take the blame. That was Coretta Scott King. Ralph Abernathy, who was MLK's right-hand man and kind of heir apparent, said King was killed by someone trained or hired by the FBI and acting on the orders from J Edgar Hoover. So that's from Ralph Abernathy, King's right-hand man. And now here is a juror from the Lloyd Jowers MLK civil trial. We all thought it was a cut and dried case with the evidence that Mr. Pepper brought to us, that there was a lot of people involved, everyone from the CIA, military involvement, and Jowers was involved. So this was a civil case, really the only trial about the assassination of MLK, because James O'Ray, the patsy, was kind of set up to take a plea so there wouldn't be a trial. So this is the only major trial of the MLK assassination. The jurors came to a unanimous decision that the government and the CIA and local mafia and the Memphis police were all involved in the assassination of Martin Luther King. So if you read Pepper's book, The Plot to Kill King, you'll see at the top of kind of the assassination plot, you have two people. You have J. Edgar Hoover and you have Clyde Tolson. Now, Clyde Tolson was J. Edgar Hoover's right-hand man and alleged homosexual lover. And the reason that's kind of important, homosexuality doesn't really play too much into this, but the mafia allegedly had pictures, specifically Meyer Lansky had pictures of Clyde Tolson and J. Edgar Hoover engaged in homosexual activities, and they would use this as blackmail over J. Edgar Hoover. So J. Edgar Hoover was going after a whole bunch of civil rights leaders and black people, but he was not going over the mob, after the mob. In fact, he was working with the mob on several occasions, including the assassination of Martin Luther King, which involved people like Carlos Marcello of the traditional mafia and other people like Russell Adkins of the Dixie Mafia. And we'll get into Dixie Mafia a little later. So Clyde Tolson, according to the book, The Plot to Kill King by William Pepper, was kind of like the point man for the assassination in terms of he was paying off the informants. He was kind of the man who worked with the mafia, and then the mafia would work with the Dixie Mafia, and the Dixie Mafia would work with the Memphis Police. But we'll get into that. So at the top of the chain, we have J. Edgar Hoover, who hated Martin Luther King, who wrote a letter to Martin Luther King and tried to blackmail him into killing himself. Now, this is an attempted murder. We've seen with the case where I think a girlfriend tried to get her boyfriend to commit suicide. He did, and she was charged with murder. So, but judging by that same logic, J. Edgar Hoover should have been charged with attempted murder for trying to get Martin Luther King to kill himself. And he was also bugging him, recording him having sex, blackmailing him, putting like all the stuff that we see today is like revenge porn and stuff that's highly illegal and stuff that will get you like 30 years in jail. J. Edgar Hoover was doing that not only to Martin Luther King, but to a lot of people. So under J. Edgar Hoover and Clyde Tolson, you've had the mafia. So Carlos Marcello was an infamous New Orleans mafia don who was involved in the JFK assassination. Everybody go back to episode 1 of Reality Theory, where I talk about the JFK assassination. You'll see Carlos Marcello played a big role. One of his lieutenants in Memphis was a man by the name of Frank Liberto, who had a grocery store as a front, but was really a heavily involved member of the mafia in Memphis who kind of controlled a lot of the underworld dealings. Now, Frank Liberto was commissioned by J. Edgar Hoover and Clyde Tolson to kind of be the point man for the JFK assassination. Now, as I said before, J. Edgar Hoover had a lot of mafia contacts, including Carlos Marcello, including Meyer Lansky, and Frank Liberto was a very close associate of Carlos Marcello. So all of these people kind of worked together, the mafia and the FBI, in the killing of JFK. So the Italian Mafia then would kind of give the job to the Dixie Mafia. Now, I talked about the Dixie Mafia before in my episode about H.L. Hunt and his role in the NFL and creating the NFL, and also his role in the assassinations of JFK and MLK. So definitely go back to my episode on Jerry Jones, H.L. Hunt, and history of white supremacy in NFL. And I believe that is Reality Theory episode 3. So definitely come check that out. So Lloyd Jowers was actually the person who admitted to being involved in the MLK assassination. He admitted on national TV, on ABC News several times. And he would kind of point out to Frank Liberto kind of hiring him to be a kind of point person and hiding the weapon. What Lloyd Jowers' big thing is that he hid the weapon that was used to shoot Martin Luther King. Another big person in the Dixie Mafia is H.L. Hunt. Again, we dealt with H.L. Hunt before in my previous episode, H.L. Hunt and history of white supremacy on the NFL. Now, he was kind of like the world's richest man at one time. He was allegedly an oil millionaire, but a lot of his money came from gambling and a lot of other illegal things he was doing. And he was definitely a point not only for the Dixie Mafia, for the Italian Mafia. Again, he was also friends with Carlos Marcello and also the Mafia Don of Dallas, where he was from. So the Dixie Mafia got the contract from the Italian Mafia to kill Martin Luther King, and they in turn gave it to the Memphis Police. Now, also in terms of what you need for an assassination, if you don't want to get caught, is you need someone to take the blame. Now, this person was James Earl Ray. James Earl Ray always denied being involved in the assassination of MLK. His lawyer, Percy Foreman, tricked him into pleading guilty for his court trial. Percy Foreman was given $125,000 bribe from John Curlington was H.L. Hunt, we talked about before. H.L. Hunt, the kind of Dixie Mafia don, rich oil guy behind JFK assassination, MLK assassination, a lot of other stuff. He also supported the Nation of Islam and the KKK. Definitely go back to my episode on H.L. Hunt. I will put it in the description. So James Earl Ray always denied being involved in the JFK assassination. He pointed to a man by the name of Raul as kind of being his handler. Now, James Earl Ray was supposedly this broke prison escapee with no resources. But after he allegedly killed MLK, didn't kill MLK, but after the MLK assassination, he was traveling to Canada. He was traveling to England. He was traveling to other places in Europe, all over the country. He had a nice new car. So he was getting a lot of money and a lot of help from a man by the name of Raul. And William Pepper actually found out who this Raul was after years of debate. And it was a man by the name of Raul Coelho, who was a Portuguese kind of CIA type guy who was involved in a lot of drug and gun running. And that was what he had James Earl Ray doing. So he had a handler by the name of Raul. And some people dismiss Raul, but William Pepper did a great job in uncovering Raul. So kind of like how we had Lee Harvey Oswald and the Patsy of my first episode on reality theory, we're talking about the JFK assassination. James Earl Ray was the patsy for the MLK assassination. The real shooters were, in fact, two people, one by the name of Frank Strausser. This is another good investigative journalism by Dr. William Pepper, who Dr. William Pepper said fired the shot. And there was another man by the name of Lieutenant Earl Clark. Both of these men were in the Memphis Police Department, and they were contracted by the Dixie Mafia, who were contracted by the Italian Mafia, who were contracted by the FBI. So another man was by the name of Earl Clark. Now, originally, we had Lloyd Jowers said Earl Clark was the man who shot MLK because he got the gun from Earl Clark. So we assumed that Earl Clark shot Martin Luther King and then we gave him the gun. But in fact, the real shooter was Frank Strausser, and Earl Clark was the spotter. So those are familiar with snipers. You'll have a two-man sniper team. One person doing the actual sniping and the other person kind of serving as a lookout to point out where to shoot, how to do it, everything. So there was a two-man team that shot MLK, both on the Memphis Police Department. One man, Frank Strausser, did the shooting. The other man, Earl Clark, did the spotting. According to William Pepper, there was also a military team that was in place to shoot Dr. King in case Frank Strausser or the Memphis Police missed. So, you know, a famous saying, shoot at the king, you best not miss. They made sure that they weren't going to miss shooting Martin Luther King, because if they did miss, there'd be an assassination attempt and an investigation, and everyone would have found out that the evil government tried to kill Martin Luther King. Not only does Dr. Pepper talk about who the shooters are, who the patsy were, who were the people at the top giving the orders, he also talked about who the informants were. So in order to keep tracks on Martin Luther King so that the shooters can get him in place and keep track of Martin Luther King's movement, the FBI needed a lot of informants. One of these informants, according to Dr. William Pepper, is Jesse Jackson, very famous Black leader, Jesse Jackson, who's considered a protege of Martin Luther King. Another one is Billy Kyle, a reverend who's been implicated in the Martin Luther King assassination as well before. And another one is a Memphis businessman by the name of Ozzie Evers. So there was a man by the name of Ron Adkins. Ron Adkins was the son of Dixie Mafia and KKK leader Russell Adkins. Now, Russell Adkins was kind of the head of the Dixie Mafia in Memphis, and he also had a son, Russell Jr., who took over being the kind of head of the Dixie Mafia when Russell Sr. died in 1967. So the plot was already happening in 1967 with his dad, and Ron Adkins' brother, Russell, took over the plot to kill Martin Luther King after his father passed. So this is the testimony of Ron Atkinson, according to Dr. William Pepper. Clyde Tolson, J. Edgar Hoover's right-hand man, told Daddy that Billy Kyles, Jesse Jackson, and Solomon Jones were all paid informants for the FBI, that they were being paid out of the Memphis office from Mr. Holloman, that Holloman had them directly under his thumb as far as getting payment and getting paid informants. Hoover's deputies, Tolson, came to visit 4 or 5 times a year for such purpose. Ron said that his father took some of the money and gave it to Ozzie Evers to pay some of their guys for particular jobs or information. Ozzie and Russell Sr. spoke roughly every other day. Ozzie provided information about the movements and according to Ron, the comings and goings of Martin Luther King. This was in the early 1960s. Ron said that Ozzie Evers dispensed money to, among others, Solomon Jones, Jesse Jackson, and Billy Kyles. The money was paid for their obtaining and passing on information. Tolson told his father that Jones, Jackson, and Kyles were also paid informants of the FBI, paid out of the Memphis office, but the money that came from Tolson was separate from the money they received from Holloman and the Memphis FBI office. The Adkins money envelopes were wrapped up with rubber bands and paper with initials BK, Billy Kyles, JJ, Jesse Jackson, and so forth. His father gave part of that money to Jesse Jackson, and he gave part of that money to Billy Kyles. Okay, Ron stated under oath that when Dr. King returned to Memphis on April 3rd, Jesse Jackson was instructed to arrange for the room change from the lower protected room 202 to the balcony room 306. Ron said that Ozzie called Jesse and told him to arrange the change of room. When asked how he knew this, he said that his mother called Ozzie on Junior's instructions and got Ozzie to act. Ozzie then called Walter Bailey, who owned the motel, and told him that Jesse was coming to see him. And Jesse went there and talked to the man or his wife, Lurlee, and had him move Martin and Ralph up to room 306. Ron said that Frank Holloman had given the instructions to Junior, who in turn passed them to his mother, who called Ozzie. He said his mom sent him to the garage to get his daddy's phone book and bring it to the house because she had to reach Ozzie. Ron said he brought in the phone book and she called Ozzie while standing right beside her when she made the call. She told Ozzie she needed to talk to him right away. He said he would call her back. She sat down in a chair and waited. When he called, she said they needed to get Dr. King moved and they needed to get hold of Jesse or someone to get it done. They considered Solomon Jones, but decided they couldn't trust him, so he got Jackson to do it. So Jesse was the man who switched Martin Luther King's room so the snipers would get an easier shot. Before, he was protected on the lower level, where it would be hard for an outside sniper to shoot him. But Jesse Jackson made sure that Martin Luther King's room was elevated where snipers from several different directions could get a good shot at him. So Jesse Jackson also played a role with the invaders not protecting Martin Luther King. So the invaders were a group kind of similar to the Black Panthers. They were a militant group that were against police brutality, that were for racial justice. They were definitely inspired by Malcolm X and the Black Panthers, and they had actually offered their services to Malcolm X while he was in Memphis. So around 5:30 to 5:40 p.m., invaders members Charles Izzy Harrington enters the motel room door and is told by a member of the hotel staff that the invaders will have to leave, ostensibly because the SCLC will no longer be paying their bill. The motel worker delivering the message confirms that the instructions came from the Reverend Jesse Jackson, who is observed by Harrington in the parking lot looking at his watch. Shocked and angry, they gather up their belongings and are gone by 5:50. So Jesse Jackson removed Martin Luther King's bodyguard shortly before Martin Luther King was assassinated, which is very helpful for the FBI if they did indeed have Martin Luther King assassinated. So Jesse Jackson later would talk about James Earl Ray. In 1997, after everyone in the King family started saying James Earl Ray's innocent and people were calling for a new trial, Jesse Jackson actually criticized James Earl Ray and tried to ruin his credibility by saying, James Earl Ray has had many opportunities to tell us the truth, said Jesse Jackson, who was with King when he was gunned down by a sniper as he stood on a balcony at Memphis's Lorraine Motel on April 4th, 1968. But James Earl Ray never got beyond Raoul. Now, he's criticizing and dismissing James Earl Ray's legitimate claims, and obviously Dr. William Pepper did find out the real Raoul and did find out that the real Raoul was a government agent, and it was also James Earl Ray's handler, and that the FBI was involved. Now, here we have Jesse Jackson dismissing James Earl Ray, and we get into that a little more. So Jesse Jackson ran for president in 1988. Well, he lost. He didn't get out of the Democratic primary, but he did have some contentious moments with George H.W. Bush. George H.W. Bush called him a hustler from Chicago, and George H.W. Bush also ran the infamous Willie Horan ad, which kind of demonized Black people as a symbol for crime. But after George H.W. Bush gets elected, Jesse Jackson is one of the first people to come meet with him, having a nice, fun lunch with George H.W. Bush. Now let's go back to George H.W. Bush. If you go back to episode 1 of Reality Theory, you will see that George H.W. Bush was involved in the JFK assassination and was a long-time CIA agent. So let's see what happened in the meeting between Jesse Jackson and George H.W. Bush. Mr. Jackson said after the 90-minute luncheon that he and Bush had discussed a range of issues, including domestic policy, the civil rights leaders' opposition to the State Department's decision to bar Yasser Arafat, the Palestinian leader, from entering the United States, and the possible parole of James Earl Ray, who is serving a 99 prison term for assassinating the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. A very bad signal. I asked him not to let him go, Mr. Jackson said in an interview. He said he thought the release of James Earl Ray would be a very bad signal for the nation. He has contacted the Justice Department to get a reading on the case. So Jesse Jackson does not want James Earl Ray to get out of jail, and which, if you look at Dr. William Pepper's arguments, which came a little later, he didn't do it. So Jesse Jackson wants James Earl Ray. He wants the scapegoat of the MLK assassination to be in jail, so much that he's working with George H.W. Bush, who at the time was behind a massive cocaine trafficking enterprise that was poisoning Black neighborhoods, and Jesse Jackson didn't speak to him about that, didn't speak to him about invading Panama. He spoke to him about James Earl Ray not being given probation, which is very interesting. So at this meeting, Bush said he had several unheralded and unannounced meetings with Jackson in the past. So Jesse Jackson and George H.W. Bush were meeting together regularly before this. I don't know why. Jackson says they were discussing the Voting Rights Acts, Haitian refugees in South Africa. I don't necessarily believe that. I believe they probably had some other nefarious plots given George H.W. Bush's track record. But here he is. There's George H.W. Bush smiling. You rarely see him smile unless he's talking about an assassination or something. But he's smiling with Jesse Jackson right here. Now, here's one thing that J. Edgar Hoover says. There will never be another Black Messiah unless we create him. So this is after Martin Luther King. So after Martin Luther King and Fred Hampton and Malcolm X were these kind of potential Black Messiahs, and they all got assassinated. The next Black Messiahs who were to be created by the FBI. Now, the FBI has a lot of media power, a lot of control over people in government. So it wouldn't be necessarily hard for the FBI to promote an African-American and make it seem like he is the leader when he's really being controlled by the FBI. So there was actually a January 1964 FBI memo to Hoover. I think it was from William Sullivan, one of Hoover's aides. And in this he says, it should be clear to all of us that Martin Luther King must, at some perpetuous point in the future, be revealed to the people of this country and to his Negro followers as being what he actually is: a fraud, a demagogue, a scoundrel. When the true facts concerning his activities are presented, such should be enough. If handled properly, to take him off his pedestal and to reduce him completely in influence. When this is done, and it can be done and will be done, okay, so they're saying they're taking out Martin Luther King. Can be done and will be done. Obviously, much confusion will reign, particularly among the Negro people. The Negroes will be left without a national leader of sufficiently compelling personality to steer them in the proper direction. This is what could happen, but need not happen if the right kind of national Negro leader could at this time be gradually developed so as to overshadow Dr. King and be in the same position to assume the role of leadership of the Negro people when Dr. King has been completely discredited or killed. Just put in that, or killed. They didn't put that in there, I did. For some months, I have been thinking about this matter. One day I had an opportunity to explore this from a philosophical and sociological standpoint with an acquaintance whom I have known for some years. I asked him to give the matter some attention, and if he knew any Negro of outstanding intelligence and ability to let me know, and we would have a discussion. He submitted to me the names of the above captioned person. Enclosed with this memorandum is an outline of the person's biography, which is truly remarkable for a person so young. On scanning this biography, it will be seen that Samuel Peirce does have all the qualifications of the kind of Negro I have in mind to advance to the positions of national leadership. Now, this memo was written in 1964. Samuel Peirce went on to be the HUD secretary under Reagan, I believe. He never was really a leader for the Black community. He was more of a kind of clerical guy. But this was written in 1964 before Jesse's kind of rise. And if you look at the positions that Jesse did in terms of media attention, being able to run for president, it's not too crazy to say that Jesse Jackson was J. Edgar Hoover's Black Messiah. If this thing can be set up properly without the Bureau in any way becoming directly involved, I think it would be not only a great help for the FBI, but would be a fine thing for the country at large. While I am not specifying at this moment, there are various ways in which the FBI could give this entire matter the proper direction and development. There are highly placed contacts of the FBI who might be helpful to further such a step. These can be discussed in detail later when I have probed more fully into the possibilities. So he is not the only person, or Dr. William Pepper is not the only person to say that Jesse Jackson was an FBI informant. Another gentleman named Michael Skolnick, a journalist from Chicago, also made the allegation. So here's what Skolnick had to say. A former U.S. Department official who once held a key position responded to my questions about the Reverend Jesse Jackson. I have examined Jesse's secret file locked up in our office. I shouldn't be talking about this. He leaned over and spoke in a low voice. It was a stack of paper several feet high, he added. Impatient, I asked, so what did it show? And he confirmed what I found out from most other sources over the years. Jesse has been an FBI informant most of his adult life, so he's a government fink, I added. Absolutely. My boss knew it. I knew it, he said as he cut off the discussion. This is crazy. Now let's end this. Thank you very much. So for the next episode, I think we're going to get into Jesse's history after. So Jesse Jackson, after the assassination of Martin Luther King and after the assassination of Fred Hampton, Jesse Jackson winds up in Fred Hampton's hometown, Chicago, actually gives a eulogy for Fred Hampton. And then he starts taking all the stuff that Fred Hampton's been doing. Fred Hampton was uniting the gangs of Chicago. Next thing you know, Jesse Jackson develops a relationship with Jeff Fort, an infamous gang leader. And his own brother also had a relationship with Jeff Fort, and his own brother just got out of jail for his relationship with the kind of Chicago gangs. So we're going to look at that really soon. Look at Jesse's kind of history after the Martin Luther King assassination and how the government definitely helped him in becoming this kind of keep hope alive, running for president, national leader. And yeah, happy Martin Luther King Day to everybody. Be on the lookout for Reality Theory episode 6. I think it's going to be on Jesse Jackson and Al Sharpton, so it should be really good. Al Sharpton is another FBI informant who is also a protege of Al Sharpton. So that's it. Thank you very much.